Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan and welcome back to Read a Book. Today I'm going to review another Star Trek novel. I've been on kind of a Star Trek book kick lately, and it is Star Trek The Next Generation Before Dishonor. This is written by Peter David. This came out in 2007, and it is one of a giant number, as you might imagine, of epic Borg versus the Federation stories. And I gotta say, it is like bizarre narrative Star Trek choices week here on Geekvolution this week, because this book is absolutely baffling. This is perplexing, it is bewildering, it is bizarre, a big stream of words beginning with the letter B that mean what in the world was Peter David thinking when he wrote this. This is, saying that this is not Peter David's best work is an absolute understatement. And yet, I think he knows it, and I think he's trolling me. And if not me, the publisher. This reads very much like Peter David didn't want to write this, like he's really just playing around and having as much fun as he possibly can in kind of Star Trek cartoon land as he's trying to write a book that he really doesn't want to be there for. Or he really did want to do this and wanted to see just how much weird, crazy stuff he could get past an editor in, as far as I can tell, making fun of the latter days of the 24th century era of Star Trek canon. I can tell a lot of things through the writing here that Peter David seems to really not like. He seems to be totally done with Borg stories. He reinvents the Borg. He feels the need to turn them into something else entirely here, and it reads like if he's not bored with the Borg, we really ought to be. Like, the Federation is constantly having run-ins with them, and at this point, it's just kind of routine, even though the Borg gets so close to completely decimating us, and he makes it as big and massive in scale as humanly possible, but it really feels like he's kind of done with the Borg. He's absolutely done with Janeway. He hates Janeway as far as I can tell, and he hates movie era Picard. And he's using this to make fun of those things and to possibly kind of just give his own take on how preposterous they are by taking the things we've done with those items in Star Trek to the furthest degree. So he doesn't exactly take those things that he doesn't like anymore, or that he's done with, as I put it a minute ago, and like do better things with them or do it his way. He kind of goes more in the ridiculous, like, latter-day Voyager direction, and tries to, I think, show you how dumb he thinks some of this stuff is by doing it kind of the way it's been done and just going as far as you possibly could with it. So the premise with this is, and I mean, like, I'm not going to be able to start saying things that happen in this book without it sounding like a fan fiction, because it's absolutely how it reads, and it feels like he totally did this on purpose. Every 25 pages or so, he throws something else in there that is absolutely nuts, and it is, with all the complaints that I'm gonna have, that I'm gonna throw at this, and all the faults that I have with it, I can't look at it with the same standards as I would your average Star Trek novel or any regular piece of literature, because I don't think it's trying to accomplish anything that traditional narrative does. I think he's just trolling here, and it's because of that, it is undeniably entertaining. So anyway, the premise here is that the Borg are back, and they've changed their tactics. and they have kind of figured out the ways in which they need to be more like us in order to defeat us. So they've gotten very deceptive, very duplicitous, and they're using abilities that apparently they've always kind of had, but they've been holding back with them because of their own kind of ideology and the way they look at the universe. So they want to, previously, they wanted to perfect themselves by finding the best in other species and technology and incorporating them in themselves. Instead of doing that now, they've decided that they're going to absorb everything. And so the Borg here has basically become Galactus. They're going around and they're eating the universe. They take matter and they convert it to energy, and then they convert it back into matter again. And so they can take a Borg cube, which apparently is actually a sentient being and always has been. According to this, the Borg cubes, and I guess all their technology, have always been a part of the collective, and that's why all the circuitry and stuff, it tends to move around, and it's all kind of one big entity. And the Borg cube is able to assimilate, or instead of assimilate things, it absorbs them and it makes itself larger. And it's incredibly comic booky and really super silly the way he describes it, and he writes it as if it's supposed to be this really scary, bombastic thing, but there's also this tongue-in-cheekness about it that makes it read like I'm not actually supposed to take it too seriously, and as seriously as some of the characters in the book are taking it, of course. So these are going to be kind of the selling points that might make you want to read this. The Borg as Galactus, and Janeway as the Borg Queen. Remember how I said a minute ago that Peter David hates Janeway? Within the first, like, 25 pages, 50 pages or so, he turns Janeway into the Borg Queen. And it's really telling right away how he feels about her, because he has... I forget who it is, but he has a character say something along the lines of, at some point, and probably in the near future, Janeway is going to cross a moral line that is so morally bereft that she's not even going to notice that she has done it. And then just after that, she becomes the Borg Queen. Now, it's not like that happens of her own volition. She certainly is, of her own volition. She certainly is the victim here, but it seems like Peter David, just in having fun with himself, turns her into the Borg Queen because he doesn't like her and he thinks that she deserves that to happen to her. And just wait till you find out what he does to her at the end. And I'm very interested to at some point read the novel, because I looked ahead to see, first of all, whether or not this even counted in canon, because this gets so absolutely preposterous that I really expected that it would be wiped out of continuity, out of book continuity in some way, because the novels apparently have a pretty tight-knit continuity, it turns out, and initially, actually, I thought that I would get to the end and it would be like a stuff that never happened kind of scenario, where there would be some sort of time travel hijinks or something that would hit the reset button and make it so that none of this happened. I will reveal, without telling you too much else about this book, that that doesn't happen. Everything ends up counting at the end of this, which is absolutely mind-boggling. And so, anyway, I'll be interested to see in reading the Voyager relaunch stuff that came out a little after this, maybe a couple years after this, to find out what exactly they do in bringing Janeway back after what happens to her in this. But anyway, so... apparently, Picard has been kind of put on notice because of something that happened in a book recently that I didn't read before this. I've been kind of jumping around a little bit in my Star Trek novel reading, and so as I'm reviewing these, you'll probably see me jump around to different eras, both in publication and in the Trek book canon. But anyway, so apparently, because of the last time that he dealt with the Borg, I guess they've dealt with them recently even, he's been put on notice because he and Seven of Nine concocted a scheme together that went against Federation orders, and so he's in trouble, and he's learned nothing from that scenario at all. I guess he feels like he was vindicated, and he ends up going against the Federation and even against his entire starship in this, and there is an attempted mutiny aboard the Enterprise because Picard is once again told by Federation admirals not to go and charge in and try to deal with the Borg, and he doesn't listen to them. The Borg are after Picard and 7 of 9. I'm honestly not entirely sure why, except the Borg is always fascinated with those two characters and wants them integrated into the Borg. So that's what they want. So they try to. So the Borg tries to kind of use the Earth as a bargaining chip in order to get Picard and 7 of 9 back into the collective, and Picard tries to, concoct his own scheme in order to go and, save the Federation and stop the Borg, and the Federation doesn't want him to do that. The admirals we're dealing with here are primarily Nechi of Angelico, and they work together, and they actually have a really cool chemistry, and I'm kind of surprised that they're two of the most likable characters in this book, and I suspect that's part of Peter David's trolling. He takes characters I like, and he makes them absolutely obnoxious and deplorable, and he takes characters that have previously been totally unstomachable and makes them really reasonable, decent human beings, and that's what he does with Nechi and Jellicoe, which is really fun and hilarious. So he writes an action movie Picard here, who is always right because the script says he's right. He knows how to deal with the Borg, and it's one of those kind of chicken or the egg, like, does morality exist because God says it does, or does God do the moral thing because it is the moral thing? Picard is always right, but it doesn't actually matter what the morality is behind it, and I really think that that is kind of a criticism of the way Picard was written in movie era, and I will just say that by the end of this, everything he does, no matter how questionable it might be, he is completely justified simply because he is Picard, and and everything he does is okay. And Peter David kind of intentionally conforms to some of the rules of latter-day Star Trek in like what is ethical and moral, because if certain characters say that something is okay, it's okay because it always has been, and they are supposed to be our heroic characters. But you can kind of read between the lines and tell that Peter David himself does not actually think that way. Peter David is really, like, it's impossible not to call a lot of this writing self-indulgent, and again, that's part of what's fun about it, as long as you get that he's doing this on purpose, if I'm right about that. But I feel like he's giving me plenty of signposts to say that I'm not supposed to take this too seriously. I mean, it's awkward because, of course, this is a novel that counts in the canon of the Star Trek novel canon, and he might just be, I don't know, angry at someone in the publishing world right now, and that's why he's writing it this way. But just for this, as a piece, that self-indulgentness is some of what makes it fun, because it is consistently ridiculous. Couple examples of that. He has Geordi LaForge at one point. This is one of the lesser examples of this, but at one point he has Geordi actually comment on the fact that the computer voice sounds like Lexana Troy. He has a captain named Lucius Fox. It is just not even spelled differently. It's just Lucius Fox for some reason. And Peter David obviously is a comic book guy and would know who that is, so he just puts Lucius Fox in his book from Batman. It's hysterical. He gets stuff from New Frontier in here. Now that's a thing that he tends to like to do, and it's not always self-indulgent. But here he just has Calhoun show up toward the end of this and work with Picard, and he's just having a ton of fun with using his own stuff there. There's this whole thing about Picard being called a Commodore, because I think Peter David just thinks that's funny, and Calhoun decides that Picard should be a Commodore because he's commanding a fleet of ships, and so then everybody thereafter is calling him Commodore just because that's now a thing. And again, that's kind of indicative of some silly writing we've seen in Voyager, and you know, I guess even Enterprise. And so I kind of think that's why he's doing that. But anyway, and then there's this whole thing about Pluto, where apparently by the 24th century we still keep going back and forth on whether or not Pluto is a planet. And this is in 2007, which I think is right around when the decision was made to stop calling Pluto a planet because a bunch of other planetoids were discovered around it, and it was the size of them. And so if we called Pluto a planet, we would have to call all of those planets, and then suddenly our solar system has a whole bunch more planet names that we have to memorize. And that's essentially the reason that Pluto was declassified as a planet. Well, he's making fun of that whole thing here, and then I don't know. I don't know if I should give this away or not. I don't want to tell you too much because this is such a ridiculous book, but this might be a selling point to get folks to read this nutso novel. So yeah, I'll go ahead and reveal this. So here is a little spoiler. The Borg eat Pluto. Yeah, they eat it. It's like Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, where Saturn disappears, except I don't think that movie seems to realize that that's actually what's happening. But anyway, it's like that. We're just nonchalantly, we lose a planet. I guess not as nonchalantly here. We do kind of freak out about it, but it's hysterical. This whole thing is just is nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And I don't think I can overestimate the nutsiness of this book, especially the last couple of pages. When we find out what exactly is going on, or not exactly what's going on, but like we check back in with the Borg after the Federation naturally defeats them, and oh boy, he goes too far. And this whole book is going too far, but he really goes too far, and it's just a wonderful coda for the preposterous cartoonishness of this book. Even the cover, just look at this cover, Star Trek: The Next Generation. And then there's 7 of 9. So immediately, you know, I'm kind of raising an eyebrow going, but it's a TNG novel. Why is just 7 of 9's face on this TNG novel? And it's about 100 pages before there's anything remotely TNG in this book. It's a Voyager novel before that, and it kind of remains, and I mean, that's okay. The Star Trek books, especially in this era and beyond, mix up everything, and so TNG is just kind of the umbrella, because it's not part of some other series, and there's as much or more TNG than there is anything else in this book, but it is kind of a confounding cover where you're immediately going, okay, that's weird that we have just 7 of 9 on a TNG book cover, and then it's called Before Dishonor, and especially after I've read the book, I don't know what that title means. I have no idea. I have racked my brain about this, and the best thing I can come up with is it's just a misplaced title. It meant to go on some other book. Should have had Klingons on it or something. Before Dishonor, there's not anybody who's particularly dishonored in this book. I mean, it seems like for a while that might happen to Picard, but like I said, hopefully I'm not giving away too much, but he is kind of justified by the end by his superiors, and 7 of 9 isn't really dishonored, and she's part of a subplot, or is kind of the crux of a subplot in trying to take down the Borg that has to do with the Doomsday Machine, where she has to. I don't want to give too much away, but she gets kind of put in a unfortunate role like Janeway does with the Borg Queen, or becoming the Borg Queen, with the Doomsday Machine in order to defeat the Borg. That's all I'll say about that. But like, she's not exactly dishonored either, and I just don't know what that means. I have no idea what this title is. I would have expected like a big court-martial or something at the end of this, and that doesn't happen. So like, everything even about the front of this is completely perplexing. Let me talk a little bit before I go about the prose. This reads like it was written out real quick in a couple of weeks, and there was no editing at all. It reads like it didn't have an editor, and like Peter David wrote up a first draft and then washed his hands of it and sent it out. It is definitely the clunkiest Peter David writing I've ever read. It is filled with, and it's very inconsistent. There are portions of it that are pretty decent, and then there are portions of it where it really needs some revision, and I can't even get my mind around Peter David writing like this in even a first draft, which tells me that he just didn't care. And again, that's part of what's fun about it, but you do have to read through some pretty clunky prose and a lot of extraneous language, and he has, you know, a lot of, and I don't want to nitpick things, but he has a lot of like that's that he doesn't need. It would be really easy to go through this with a red pen and just cross out swaths, words, and then swaths of exposition and just language that doesn't need to be there at all. He has good he has good voices for certain characters, and other characters he's not even trying. He seems to really want to make sure that Spock is written correctly. He's got Spock here, and Spock is helping out Picard and Seven of Nine. And every time he writes Spock, that dialogue sounds like stuff that Spock would say, and I have Leonard Nimoy's voice in my head. Hardly any other characters do I actually have their voice in my head. Like I said, I like his Jellicoe and his Nechayev, and I guess they sound like themselves, but like a much more, you know, open-minded and thoughtful version of each of those characters. His Picard, I don't have a voice in my head for at all. Patrick Stewart's not there, and I think that's intentional. His Picard is a complete one-note, angry, psychopathic character who is always right because he says he's right, and then his Janeway we don't even see for very long before she becomes the Borg Queen, and then she just kind of talks like a, you know, generic stolid Borg Queen. And I guess his Geordi is fine, but like I said, the one character he really has a great voice for is Spock, and but the language is really all over the place, and much of the time reads pretty young adult fiction, pretty juvenile. And this is a very seasoned Peter David. You know, this is after a bunch of other Trek novels and a bunch of other really good Trek novels. Like I go to Peter David as my favorite Star Trek novelist, one of my favorite novelists in general. So as I'm criticizing his language here, I feel like he's either doing it on purpose or he just doesn't care. Some of this, I'll go as far as to say, it reads like he's writing it while he's watching something else on television. That's what it reads like, and it's hilarious. If that sounds like fun to you, you should pick up this book and read it. But, I mean, really, like, after a couple dozen novels from the New Frontier series, after the Imzadi trilogy, after Q Squared, and Q in Law, and all that stuff, even, not that I've read this in a really long time, but this is a sequel to a novel he wrote in '91 called Vendetta, and it goes, that's where all of, and I had forgotten all about this, I had to go back and look at that book, and one thing else I'll criticize about this is that nowhere does it mention, as far as I noticed, that this is a sequel to Vendetta. Like, it really, you know, when you open this up, it really should have said, like, you might want to go back and read Vendetta. It's almost 20 years old at this point now. It's almost 30 years old, but again, this came out a decade ago. But Vendetta is where he establishes his Doomsday Machine mythology, and I guess we have kept that canonical for all this time, and I wonder if any other writer ever went back to the Doomsday Machine and used it this way, but apparently the Doomsday Machine was built by another species in order to combat the Borg in the first place, and that's what it is, and it also has a crystalline entity, but not the crystalline entity in it that pilots it, so it is not sentient, but it has a sentient creature in it that pilots it, and he puts a whole lot of different things from, you know, cherry-picking from different Star Trek things together to make the Doomsday Machine work as a machine to fight the Borg, and it's really weird to do a sequel to that many years later, and for a sequel to your own novel to be a thing that reads like you really didn't want to write it, and like you're kind of just making fun of the material, and it's self-parody, and you maybe are, again, it reads like he's mad at somebody who made him write this book, and so he just kind of, you know, trolled like a crazy person. I mean, even the dedication, like he's just making fun of stuff and joking throughout this whole. The dedication is for Bajorn and the rest of the Borg. Need I say more? This is an absolute quagmire and a ton of fun. So anyway, that is my review of Star Trek: The Next Generation before Dishonor. Whatever that means. Anyway, I am Captain Logan, and I will see you again with lots more content here in the foreseeable future on Geekvolution. Thanks a lot for watching, and happy reading.